and and start with the lecture. Hello everyone. Thanks for coming today. This is the second lecture of the course. A bit of context on myself. My name is Kofi. I'm a big blockchain data nerd. And I write a newsletter every week on NFT market data called Nifty Table. This year, I made the jump into working in Web3 full time at a crypto venture firm called One Confirmation. I'll be leading you through today's session. Really happy to be doing that. Just to make sure, before I start, can everyone see my screen okay? Is my screen sharing working fine?
Yes.
Yep, it's working.
Awesome. Do that. So today we'll be covering a few things. We'll talk about what a token standard is, and we'll learn about two of the most common token standards, which are the ERC20 and the ERC721. Then we'll learn about how to add new contracts to the Dune database. And finally, we'll jump into some SQL and write queries to get aggregate metrics, such as how many users use the protocol on a certain day, stuff like that. So that's the plan. First off, we're going to talk a bit about token smart contract standards. So as a lot of you will already be familiar with, tokens are basically assets tracked on a blockchain, and they can be used to represent currencies or shares or deeds to unique artworks and other such things. And a smart contract is used to create a token. It handles the transactions, and it keeps track of who owns how much of said token. On Tuesday, for example, you guys looked at the contract for the USDC token with Andrew, I remember, and this is a big part of how the entire blockchain economy and ecosystem works. So each token contract can be unique, which is cool. But imagine you want to make an app that can interact with all stablecoin type contracts. You don't have to write custom code to talk to each contract. You'd prefer to have to only write code once that can interact with all the stablecoin type tokens. So to make that dream possible, that dream of I want to write an app that can interact with all tokens in this category, the Ethereum community proposes token standards. That's just like a huge part of how the system works. The first token standard we'll look at, and by far the most popular one, is the ERC20. It's a set of guidelines you follow when you want to create a token where each unit is identical to the rest. So this works great for currencies, loyalty points, shares, and that kind of thing, where each unit is the same as the next one. ERC20, as a guideline, sets out 6 mandatory functions that contracts of this standard have to have, and 3 optional ones. So say you're writing a contract for an ERC20 token, you have the option to give your token a name, a symbol, and specify how many decimal places it's divisible to. So these are things that you can do, but the things that you have to do for it to count as an ERC20 is you have to have a function that defines the total supply of your token. So once supply hits that number, the smart contract will be incapable of creating new tokens. You have to have a balance of function that returns how many tokens a given address owns. You have to have a transfer function to transfer a set amount of tokens from the total supply to a user. And you need to have a transfer from function that handles transfers between any two users. It's right down there. Then there's approve and allowance functions for checking if a contract can give a user tokens and if a user has and owns enough of a token to make a specific transfer. Now, for data analysis purposes, you won't have to write a contract yourselves, but it's good to know how they work, and you'll see calls to functions that look similar to these functions in the course of your work. So, if you're curious for more details about, the ERC20 functions and all that, you can read about these things in the Open Zeppelin documentation that I've linked to here. Next up, we have the ERC721 token standard. So that's a set of guidelines you follow when you want to create a token where each unit is unique, also known as an NFT. So ERC721 defines these mandatory functions. Similar to ERC20, you have functions to check how many tokens a wallet owns and to make transfers. Note that a big difference here is that in this case, when making a transfer, we have to specify which token we are transferring using the token ID because each one is unique. It matters which specific one we're sending. Optional functions in the ERC721 framework includes things like having a mint function and a burn function and functions for other such actions. So to reiterate why we follow these guides, pre-ERC20, everyone who wanted to make a fungible token did it slightly differently. Pre-ERC721, everyone who wanted to make a non-fungible token did it slightly differently. So any wallet or app that wanted to interact with a new token had to write custom code to do it. And now all of these tokens follow the same standards, so you only need to write code once and it will work for all the tokens of that standard. So, I mean, that was a bit of a long stretch. Are there any questions so far or any confusions about kind of this early part about token standards and how that all works? I remember that when I was first learning about this stuff, it is a bit of a mental jump to make because it's easy when you first get into Web3 to kind of like visualize like, oh, this is kind of like I'm taking a coin out of my physical wallet and putting it in somebody else's physical wallet, when in reality, more the fact that these balances are being kept track of on contracts. It's the reality is a bit different from how it's presented. But yeah, any questions about that?
Quick question. Do you know when these standards were created or enacted or popularized?
That's a really good one. I honestly don't know. So, I'll just Google it right now. ERC20,
Yeah, because the
when
reason why I asked, I just put in the chat, I wonder if punks were pre-ERC 721
that's a
and like how
really
they did it.
that's a really awesome question right there. So punks were pre-ERC 721. So the CryptoPunks contract is slightly different to all the other kind of NFT contracts that are ERC 721s that you see nowadays. If we go to the contract, we'll see functions like this. Functions like punk bid and all punks assigned, and just kind of these very specific to this use case functions that aren't the same as what you'd find on any other ERC 721. So if I pull up, say, the contract for the Bored Ape Yacht Club, which is another popular NFT project, which is an ERC 721, and I go to the contract, we will see some of the kind of the normal functions that we saw here. Somewhere here there'll be a balance of function, I'm sure. There it is. There will be a what will it be? There'll be a get approved. Yep, that's right there. So you can see these mandatory functions are all here. if you're writing an app like OpenSea that's a marketplace, you know, you're good. You just have to write code to interact with these functions, and you know it will be the same regardless of whether it's an ape or some other project. But with CryptoPunks, you'd have to write custom code to be able to interact with the CryptoPunks contract because that was made before the standard, and it's got these functions that are named different things and work in different ways. And yeah, that's kind of it's a good bit of history right there. Um, thanks for flagging that up. That made for a pretty good example. Um,
I also
I
heard that punks were on chain, like the actual pixels are on chain. Is there any way that we could see that in the contract when we're doing a sort of analysis?
So yeah, the images for the punks are on chain. I don't think that the individual, like for each individual punk, the image is on chain, but it's rather that there's an image that contains all of the punks that is on chain, and that is referred to in the contract. I'd have to do a bit of searching to figure out like exactly which function you'd call if you wanted to get the address of that kind of group image, but at least that's how I understand it worked. But yeah, here we can see this is the proposal that was made for ERC721, and that was made in 2018. So we can assume that that's when that happened. ERC20, already you can tell by the number, and a lot earlier. Oh, and easy. So that was implemented in 2015. That's a lot earlier down the line. So yeah, that's kind of really great context there. Thanks for yeah, taking us down that road. Um, yeah, so I think kind of the next things to think about from here is that we've got all of these contracts. We've got these ERC20s, these ERC721s, and we have apps that interact with those tokens, like marketplace contracts and exchanges. And say that we want to do some data analysis on the history of events that happened with the contract, and we want to do that analysis on Dune. Our first step would usually be to submit that contract for decoding or to check if it's already been decoded. What happens in the decoding process is that Dune converts the smart contract history, in the form of like traces and logs that we've been looking at in the last lecture and the last workshop. As we've already experienced, traces and logs are hard to read, and you have to do all this kind of investigating to figure out what they mean. So Dune converts those into tables that are easy to read. So Dune will make a table for each function and each event defined in a smart contracts ABI, and then we can write queries for those tables. Quick take on ABIs. Some, well, not all smart contracts are written in high-level languages like Solidity, and then they're compiled into bytecode that can be stored on the blockchain. So to access a function on a contract, so say we want to check how many of an ERC20 a wallet owns, we need to translate our request into bytecode as well. And there's a set convention for doing that conversion, but you've got to use the right names and the right data types, and you've got to have it in the right format. And an ABI lays that out in an easy to process format. So, based on your experiences, some of you might have heard of APIs before, and an ABI is kind of like a lower level version of that for interacting with smart contracts as opposed to interacting with web servers. So that was a quick aside um, on ABIs, and this is basically what Dune needs to do this conversion and make a contract's historical information into an easy to read format. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, right now just kind of run through and show you how to submit a contract for decoding, which is a really kind of easy and quick process. They've done a great job of making it. So I'll share link in the chat, but it can be found in the Dune, what's the word? Dune documentation. Andrew had a comment. You'll notice that there are a few different transfer functions. However, they all emit the transfer event. Yeah, this is a good point that Andrew made in the chat. There are different transfer functions, called transfer from, safe transfer. But for those different functions, they'll all create, when they're successful, a transfer event will happen and will show up in the history of things. And we'll see more we'll get a better idea of kind of events and function calls as we kind of move through this course. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I posted that link. Just got a bit confused there for a second. So I want to submit a contract for decoding. Let's say I want to do it for the contract for Genie. The team from Genie came and had a bit of a talk yesterday. They're one of the sponsors for this course. It's a really cool app. What I would do is that I would search up the Genie contract. I can probably find that here. Yeah, it would be this one, Genie Swap. So that's their contract right there for their app that you can use to swap ETH for batches of NFTs, or swap ETH and a batch of NFTs for another batch of NFTs, as you saw yesterday. I've got their contract. I will paste their contract address in here, and I'd select next. And then I would give this project a name in lowercase, no spaces, use underscores if you need to. I would just call this Genie, and this is the name that it will show up with when I, search it up in the query view. I would call this Genie, or I'd call this Genie Swap. And then I'd select next, and there'll be a few questions. It will ask me to go to Etherscan and get the contract name, which is right here, to help Dune to find that contract. If this contract was made by a factory contract, then you'd indicate this here. What that means is that in some cases with some apps like Uniswap, you have a factory contract that is used to produce a bunch of subcontracts. So the example used here is that Uniswap v2 has a factory contract that is used to produce each pair contract. So Uniswap is used to swap different tokens. An ETH USDC pair, like to swap ETH and USDC, that contract for that pair would be produced out of the factory contract. That isn't the case in this case, so don't need to change anything there. I can just select next, and we can see our project name, contract address, and Dune has found the ABI that we talked about before for the Genie Swap contract. And as you can see, well, it's hard for us to read, but it's easy to process and code. For every function of the Genie Swap contract, it's kind of laying out the data types and the names and the the kind of the structure of those functions in a way that will make it simple to create requests and such. And yeah, at this point, you might you would want to put in your email so that when the decoding is done, you'd get a notification about it. Now, I don't actually need to submit this because, as you can see, I already searched it up, and Genie's contract has already been added to the Dune database. So if I search Genie in the query view, I find a set of easy to read tables, and there's one table for each function call, and one table for each event, and each one of these tables uh, details the information that's passed into function and the time at which that function call happened. Yeah, I think that's probably a good way of describing it. Jump back to the slides real quick. So that was how decoding works. Hopefully that was clear. And finally, we're gonna jump into doing some SQL and learning some SQL concepts that will allow us to answer some cool questions about Genie in this case and how Genie operates. First thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to write a simple query to kind of just look at some of the information that's available to us. So in the case of Genie swap, whenever someone does a swap on Genie to exchange ETH for some batch of NFTs or another swap along those lines, the multi-asset swap function is called. So that is this one, Genie function call multi-asset swap. So, I just want to check it out and see what kind of information is available in there. So I'm going to do select everything from this table. And there's probably a lot of information in this table, so I don't actually want to pull up all of it. I maybe only want to see the last 10 results just to get an idea. Why am I doing that? Just to get an idea of what's going on. The weird thing about typing, the moment that people are watching you type, you suddenly forget how to do anything. What did I do wrong there? Like,
There's no from.
You're just missing the word from.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, guys. So I'm going to select everything from Genie multi-asset swap. And as we can see, for each swap, each row represents a different swap that happened. And there's some information there about the trade details. There's a really long array thing that isn't that easy to read. And then there's also the time that the swap occurred, the block number in which the swap occurred, some key details in there, and whether or not calling this function was successful, whether or not going through with that swap was successful. So we've got all this information. We know a bit more about the historical data that's available. And now we might want to, work with the Genie team to answer a few questions. So, imagine that, you or I were working with the Genie team as an analyst and, we want to show how many swaps happened last week, for instance. So to show how many swaps happened last week, I would need to use an aggregate function. There are lots of different aggregate functions. If you've ever used Excel, you'll already be familiar with, the look and feel of a lot of these. There's ones to count and sum and find the average and the minimum and the maximum. You can, Google kind of SQL aggregate functions to find like full lists of, all the possible aggregate functions that are available. So yeah, to know how many swaps occurred last week, I'm going to use the count function. I'm going to start by making a table of swaps that happened last week. I'll do select everything from multi-asset swap, where, let me pull up multi-asset swap here. Yeah, what I want is the call block time in this case. Last week was from the 18th to the 24th. So I'm going to say I want call block times where the time is greater than or equal to, and if I'm remembering correctly, I'm pretty sure it's month, day, year. So it's the 18th of October 2021. It has to be above that date, and it has to be before this date, the 24th. So that will create a table that contains swaps that happened in that week. And I'm also only interested in calls that were successful. So that function was successfully executed. So I'm going to say where call success was true. And so that will, just to kind of run that and see, that will show me a table of swaps that happened last week. And I want to count them. So I'm going to, instead of doing select everything, I'm going to do count everything. And that will give me one number of 97.
You're actually it's supposed to be less than for the date if you're doing in between 18 and 24.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for kind of pulling that up. Yeah, as I'm kind of trying to do things live, I will 100% definitely make more tiny mistakes like that. So please feel free to call me out as we go on. It will be a good kind of learning experience and make sure that I'm not sharing any false information. So yeah, last week I'd be able to go to the Genie team and say, hey, 155 swaps happened. So that's great. But it's not very good for comparison, because then the team might ask, like, is this more swaps than happened the week before last week? And what about the week before that? Maybe the team updated UI week before last week, and it's really pretty now, and they want to know if more swaps happened as a result. So to answer this question, I'll comment it out for now. To comment things out, you can hold Control and / to comment them out, but they basically won't. What's the word? That code, it will almost be like it doesn't exist. It's just a comment. Also, quick point on the comparisons. Less than and equal to, greater than and equal to. You can Google SQL comparisons if you're not familiar with that kind of syntax to see more operators like that. But yeah, as I was saying, kind of answer the question of what has been happening with the number of swaps for all weeks, not just 1 week, but for all weeks. I have to group the swap data down into weeks, and then I need to do a count for each week. So, the question that we're going to try and answer, just put this here for people who are looking at this later, is how many swaps happened all week really has operated? That would be the question that the team is trying to get us to do for them. So I'm going to make a new table for this question. going to kind of copy and paste this so I don't need to start from the beginning. And in this table, I'm going to once again be doing some counting, and I want to look at weeks. So what I'm going to use here is called the date truncation function, and it will help me to convert the very detailed time information that we get into weeks, because we don't need to know what second these swaps happened. We really need to know what week they happened in, and we want to group them according to that. So I'm going to do date trunc week, and it's the call block time that I'll be truncating there. So, I want to count everything. I want to, group that count by the week. So I want to use the group by statement here. And there are a number of ways to specify that I date trunc weeks, group by weeks. It would also work if I said group by 2, because weeks is the second kind of statement in this list. But I'm gonna, for the sake of readability, say group by weeks. My mistake. I wanted to say count everything for the weeks from GenieSwap where the function was called successfully, and I'm going to group by weeks. And that will give me this nice little table here. So the week starting on the 18th, this is how many swaps happened. The week starting on the 11th, that's how many swaps happened, and so on and so forth. The beautiful thing about Dune is that now it's just like a one-click thing to make this into a bar chart. I can say that I want the x-axis to be weeks and the y-axis to be the count of number of swaps that happened. And the beautiful bar chart shows up there, and I can show this to the team, and I can tell them that, hey, this week that started October 4th was the most active week that you ever had. So whatever you did then was a good idea. Keep doing that, and now we're delivering useful information to the people who are developing the protocol and to the users of that protocol. Awesome. So I think maybe a good exercise to do now, just to kind of mix things up a bit, so that I'm not talking the whole time, and so that maybe you guys can, some of you who might not have as much SQL experience can get a feel of this. Let's do a quick let's make it like a 5-minute exercise where I would ask you to write a function like this, where instead of looking at the counting the number of swaps per week, I would want you to get the average number of swaps a day. So I'd ask you to kind of open up Dune, open up the query view, and I'll start the timer now for 5 minutes, if that sounds like enough time. And yeah, I just want you to try a hand at doing average swaps per day. Let me start the timer for that now. Does that sound good to everyone? Hey, you, just confirmation that makes sense.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Makes sense.
Yeah, sounds
Cool.
good.
Awesome.
Okay, can you paste that small bit of code in the chat lecture, please?
Oops, I did something weird there. Yeah, I'll do that. So this is the example that you can kind of build off of. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to get, oh yes, and I'll put the question in the chat as well. So average, I cannot type when I know people are watching, average number of swaps per day. So instead of count, you want to do average. Instead of weeks, you want to do days. That's what we're aiming for right now. And yeah, just try your hand at that. And we'll, in 5 minutes time, I'll come back and I'll do the answer on my screen.
Any particular date range?
Just do it for all of the time that Genie has operated. It's only the protocol's only been active for a few months, so that hopefully that query shouldn't take too long to run. Yeah. So for all time. All right. About 5 minutes have passed there. So gonna weird. Black. Anyway. Oh, that might be somebody's answer. Hide that for a minute. So yeah, let me kind of show how I would answer that question, and then we can move on to the next topic. average swap per day. So instead of doing count, I'm going to do average, and in the time period, I'm going to do day instead of week. And I'm going to call it days. I will group by the days. I mean, even before I go through with this, maybe a good thing to point out would be that, say I just like ran select days from Genie Swap. I would just give me a list of all of the days where swaps happened. Sorry, I would give me it wouldn't give me a list of all the days where swaps happened. What it will give me is for every single swap that occurred. So each row here represents a different swap that occurred. What day did it happen on? So, for instance, all these rows represent swaps that happened on the day of 26th. I don't know what month that is. 26th July or whatever. So that's what each one of those rows represents. When I'm doing average, what it's doing is looking at each of those groups of days and giving me the average number of rows there. So I can save that and run. Is average not the? I thought that was the function for average. What am I what am I missing there?
You're running the average on all of the data instead of the count. Yeah, so you need to do like the count per day and then the average of that.
Yep, you're right. That actually makes perfect sense. Wait. Yeah, no, that does make sense. As I'm thinking about this in a weird way. Oh, yes. Yeah, I totally get what you mean. Yeah. So what I rather want to do is I want to do the count per day as she greatly pointed out. So these are the number of swaps that happened on each day, and I want to get an average of like set of data, which is actually the perfect kind of scenario to bring us into the next topic that I wanted to discuss, which is common table expressions. So, common table expressions add another kind of layer of of power to SQL queries. Basically, we can create a named query result. In this case, the number of swaps that are happening in each day. And we can create a named query result and use that result in another query. We want to use this data in another query that is checking for the average. So to make this first query into a common table expression, I'll decide what to call it as I go along. I would write something along the lines of with, and then the name. I'll say count per day as, and then some brackets. And this query will go into my bracket. So that's my common table expression there. I can then refer to in a completely new query. So now we're stacking queries now. There's a lot of power here. So I'm going to say select the average of count. I would want to give a name to this row here, this because that will make it a lot easier. I'll say count everything as count, just naming this column in this table. Already been named count, but this will make it easier to write this query. I want to get the average of count from the count per day table the count per day query that I just wrote. Select everything from count per, select average of counts from count per day.
There's a comma at the end of the select the table.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. This is awesome. I'm basically, running through the exercise, but you guys are basically schooling me at this point, which is awesome. But yeah, I left a comma there. A comma would be fine if I was making multiple common table expressions. Like if there were many of these, I would use a comma, and I would make maybe another one that was called count per week. If I wanted to do that, and that would be a whole new one, and I'd make a list. But there's only one in this case, so there's no need for a comma. I can run that, and that will give me an answer. This was actually a mistake on my part of using this as the example, because it was using a concept that I hadn't actually gotten around to teaching yet, so totally my bad there. But I'm glad that it kind of organically took us into learning about common table expressions. So yeah, mistake made, but I think a good result. Okay, nice. Are there any questions at this point about, aggregates and grouping by and common table expressions? I know that I was kind of hoping that by teaching it by actually writing queries as opposed to just like showing you slides that describe the functions, that would be an easier way to learn. But since this is the first time that we're doing this, really open to hearing feedback on whether or not this was kind of the best way to deliver that. If anyone's feeling lost, it would be kind of good to share that. I'll put the link to this query here in the slide, so that anybody referring to this content later will be able to find it. I don't know what I'm doing there. Make this a bit bigger. You'll be able to find this here with all of the kind of queries that we looked at commented out. And, we'll also, I think Andrew's already shared his queries from his lecture, and you'll be able to get all of the queries from all of the lectures on the course. But yeah, any questions at the moment? And I see some answers here that people are. Yeah, this is a clever use of spoilers. I honestly didn't know that there was a thing where you could black out text in Discord until it was clicked. That's a cool, it's a cool function. And kind of taking a look here, this would have worked perfectly fine. Let me have a swap from. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that would have worked too. So good stuff. But yeah, I think that already based on the fact that you guys were very graciously helping me pick out my errors as we were going along. You're all doing really great. I just kind of wanted to put that out there. I know that if I was just starting out using Dune and I was going through this program, I'd probably be a bit overwhelmed right now. But you all seem to kind of be taking it in stride, which is awesome. Some credit to Andrew here for kind of picking out a really strong cohort. But this really covers all of the content that I wanted to go through today. So, if nobody has any questions or kind of other topics that they'd want to explore within this field, then I'd be happy to kind of close out the lecture here and give you guys an extra 8 minutes of your day back. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
Nice. Awesome. Love that. Got a resounding yes from the crowd. So yeah, happy to have done this. Really great. What's the word? Yeah, go through this exercise with you guys, and we'll be back next time for the next workshops, for the next lectures, and I'll see some of you then. Have a good one. Bye for now.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Kofi.